It's not often a Super Bowl MVP who at times has looked elite ends up swapping to a different team. But enough about Joe Flacco, this video is going to be about Nick Foles. It's been reported that the Jaguars plan on signing Nick Foles. We all remember him tearing apart the New England defense in Super Bowl 52, but let's take a look at how effective he was really able to be. Like on a play like this, it's a cover 2 man, and those are the routes that the Eagles will be running, and you're going to want to take a look at those 2 routes right there. Typically against a cover 2 man, anyone would tell you that you want to hit a quick crossing route, as that's the best way to beat a cover 2 man because there's no one in the area, and quick cuts are a great way to beat man coverage. And if you take a look, that crossing route is very well open, but Nick Foles has faith in himself and faith in his abilities, and he's actually going to throw it to a hook route that's farther down the field that is a much more difficult throw to make. However, it will allow him to pick up more yards if he does make it. This isn't even a ton more yards, maybe it goes for 7 more yards than it would have had he just hit the crossing route. However, it just goes to show the kind of mindset Foles had in this game. We saw in Super Bowl 53 that Jared Goff and McVay had a very timid approach and it worked out very poorly. Doug Peterson and Nick Foles had a very aggressive mindset heading into this game, and it really was a huge way they were able to be so effective and able to pull off a victory against one of the best dynasties in sports history. Let's take a look at another example of Foles' aggressive mindset. On a play like this, it's a cover 1 linebacker blitz, and if you take a look, these are the routes the Eagles are running, and those 2 crossing routes in the middle of the screen, both could end up getting open, as again, crossing routes against man coverage is typically good, especially when they're breaking away from that safety who's in the middle of the screen. But they also have Alshon Jeffrey running a go route on the top half of the screen, and so if nothing else works, Foles could decide to throw it there. Typically that kind of route is a break glass in case of emergency. There definitely is a receiver that's going to be open in one of those crossing routes right in the middle of the screen. But despite that, Foles is going to take a chance and throw it to the end zone anyways. There's a reason he got his nickname, and I'm not talking about Saint Nick, and it's because he makes bold decisions like this one. It's also worth noting that while these decisions are probably the ones that your coach would tell you not to make, he's making perfect throws, and that's how it's working. Like this one's another good example. As you see, it's a cover 1 linebacker blitz once again, and those are the routes on the top half of the screen that the Eagles will be running. If you're going to take a look at that out route right there, that's pretty much the best way to beat man coverage, although it is kind of a tough angle because it's breaking away from the quarterback. There still is a cut, so it could be a great way for a receiver to get open. But now at this point, if you take a look, Stephon Gilmore actually does a very good job of reading this play and realizing what's going on. He's actually going to break back to try to also help cover up that out route. I mean, this is the type of play that when a corner makes it, it can often result in an interception. However, the throw was right on the money, and it's still a completion despite it now turning into double coverage. Foles was absolutely on fire that whole Super Bowl, and really he was on fire 2 weeks before in the NFC Championship as well. Like on this play, for example, if you take a look, the Vikings are trying to disguise here, as they have a lot of guys on the line, but they're actually going to be dropping back into coverage and running a cover 3 zone. But that ends up being perfect news for the Eagles, as they have several routes that are going to be past that initial zone coverage, and since there's now more Vikings in that middle of the screen, this now means that it'll be easier for the receivers to get past them. But again, there's a disguise here, so Foles has to figure this out very quickly. But that's exactly what he's going to do. He right off the bat realizes what's going on, but it's also worth mentioning that a Vikings linebacker also realizes what's going on. He's going to actually cut to the top half of the screen a little bit, which is now going to clog up that route that could have otherwise been open. So then what Foles is simply going to do is move up into the pocket to now give himself a better angle to make that throw. This is basically high-speed chess right now. It's the Viking linebacker trying to do a better job of getting a better angle so that Foles can't make a throw, and Foles doing what he can to give himself the best angle to make a throw. And he does, in fact, give himself a good enough angle and makes a great throw, and the Eagles are able to pick up a first down. I also thought this play was pretty great. As you see here, it's going to start off as it's going to be a run to the bottom half of the screen. But it's actually going to be a flea flicker, and he's going to pass it back to Foles. And now if you take a look, the flea flicker fake works out very well, as there is a receiver who's going to be wide open past his assigned corner. But the problem is that Harrison Smith actually does a great job of reading this play, realizing what's going on and what's going wrong, and he's going to cut back to that side of the screen to now try to cover up that Eagle who's trying to get open towards the end zone. So even though that receiver was able to get past his corner, this is now still a really tough play for Foles to make because the safety is doing a very good job on this play. But once again, Foles just makes a perfect throw, and the reality is, if you can make a great throw like that, I don't care what coverage the defense is running, I don't care what kind of fakes you're running as an offense, if you can make throws that are perfect, then you're going to be able to convert some plays. Take a look at his next play. It's a cover 1 hole, and these are the routes that Eagles will be running, and you're going to take a look at that route right there, as it should be a great way to beat a cover 1 hole. If you take a look here, there's not going to be a problem, as the defensive back and wide receiver start to hug, which is understandable because football is a physically demanding sport, and sometimes you just need a hug. But the problem with this is that now Foles' first read isn't really going to be as open as he wanted it to be. But what he's going to end up doing is just rolling out of the pocket, making a great throw on a run to hit a very tight window and get the ball to Jeffrey, who's able to make the catch and run all the way to the 35-yard line. So long story short on that one, I guess, Foles played very well during their playoff run, but I think we all kind of knew that. I think that I tried to shed some light on what made him so effective, but I think we all knew that Foles played very well then. I think the story about Foles is that he's only played well with the Eagles, but personally, I don't think that that's totally fair to blame Foles for that. He's only played for 3 different teams. One of those was the Eagles. Another one was the Rams under Jeff Fisher. And the reality is, really in the past decade, no quarterback under Jeff Fisher has played well. Like, Foles really wasn't in the best situation in that scenario. Like, take this play for example. This is going to be a cover 1 linebacker blitz, and the Rams are actually running a pick play, which is a great way to beat a cover 1 linebacker blitz. They're going to simply send a receiver out to block the Packer who's in charge of guarding their halfback Todd Gurley, and then Gurley can simply just run over and break to the middle of the field. One problem is the receiver in charge of setting that pick isn't going to do a good enough job of moving over to that left side of the screen. This is now going to make things very easy for that Packer to simply just get around him. If you take a look right there, there's pretty much just complete chaos going on in that situation where Foles is under a ton of pressure and doesn't really have a lot of time to be making a throw. Also worth noting, Todd Gurley decided to take a nap here, which is understandable since football is a physically demanding sport and sometimes you just need a nap. However, now that means that Foles has nobody to throw it to since the guy who he's trying to throw it to is on the ground, and it ends up being an easy interception. I mean, you could blame Foles for making this throw, but the reality is he was supposed to make this throw. The rest of his team let him down. This play's maybe a better example of how things didn't really work out for him. As you see, they're going up against a cover 2 zone, and those are the routes that his receivers will be running, and there's going to be a route right there that could be in a gap in coverage that could end up getting open. But really what's going to end up happening here is a receiver ends up getting slowed down by a linebacker right in that middle of the field, and that's going to take that receiver longer to get into that gap in coverage and allow the opposing defenders to be able to swarm him easier and be able to make a play. That means that the gap in coverage ends up becoming smaller, and the ball ends up getting tipped up and intercepted. The Rams just didn't have much talent around him, and it was a really bad situation for him to be in. Foles can be successful when he has a good situation around him. People seem to forget about his stint in Kansas City, and I guess it makes some sense, as he only started 2 games, but it's worth mentioning that the Chiefs were 2-0 in the games that he started. He actually played pretty well for them. If you take a look at this play, it was a cover 3 zone, and those are the routes that his receivers on the top half of the screen will be running, and it's worth noting that there's 2 receivers running go routes that should get in the zone on the top half of the screen. Another very important detail to this play is the fact that they have another receiver running deep towards the middle of the screen, meaning that the safety in the middle of that cover 3 is going to have to guard him, and therefore can't break up to the top half of the screen. At least that's how it's supposed to work on paper. That safety who's in charge of guarding that middle of the screen is actually going to creep up anyways to try to make sure he can cover one of those 2 receivers who's in that top half of the screen. This is now going to mean that Foles' first 2 options are off the table and he should actually throw it to the middle of the screen. And he reads this all very well and makes a very good throw for a touchdown. Foles can play, and it's worth mentioning that the quarterback situation for Jacksonville last season wasn't very great. Blake Bortles is a very likable person, but the reality is he just didn't play very well as quarterback for the Jaguars. Like, take this play for example. It's a cover 4 zone, and those are the routes that his receivers will be running, and you want to take a look at that route right there, as it could be in a gap in coverage in between 2 linebackers. Bortles reads the play correctly and tries to hit his receiver, but ends up just missing the throw. It hits off his receiver's hands and ends up being intercepted. It wasn't a great throw from Bortles, but it's also worth mentioning that good receivers can still make that kind of catch. The offensive talent on that Jacksonville side of the ball isn't exactly great. I do think that Bortles got pretty scapegoated in a lot of ways regarding that Jacksonville offense. Not to say that he was good, but just the fact that they kind of used him to cover up all of their other flaws. Like, take a look at this play, for example. It's a cover 4 zone, and those are the routes that the Jacksonville receivers will be running, and you're going to take a look at that route right there, as it's right in the gap in coverage and could be open. And it's going to end up getting more open as Jacksonville runs play action, and a Bill falls for it, meaning there's not going to be a wide open gap in coverage right in the middle of the screen, and so that's where Bortles is going to look to throw to. He ends up making a pretty good throw, however, his receiver just drops the ball. This is a huge dropped pass. I mean, this could have been an easy first down, and instead, it ends up being Bill's ball inside the 20 already. The reason I'm bringing all this up is I really do think that Nick Foles coming to the Jaguars is very good for Jacksonville. However, their work isn't done yet. They're going to have to make some improvements on the offensive side of the ball if they're going to be successful, because let's be honest, we all know their defense can play well. It's going to be up to their offense to be able to hold their own. Nick Foles isn't Drew Brees, but he's very good. And if Nick Foles can hold his own and the Jaguars offense can hold their own, then this team could easily be back in the postseason and easily be back and fighting for a Super Bowl berth.